When I was young, my mother was diagnosed with leukemia. I remember not understanding the severity of the situation and thinking that she's going to get better. My mother was patient, kind, and she always had a smile on her face. My mother led by example, but she also knew which lessons I had to learn alone. After a rare argument when I was 6 years old, I remember I told my mom that I wanted to run away. And without saying a word, she handed me a black trash bag and let me pack my stuffed animals. But as soon as I walked out the door, I began to cry. And when she let me back in, I saw that she was crying as well. And I never threatened to run away from her again. It wasn't until the last few months, when my mother would come home with far less hair and she could no longer climb the stairs to her room, that I understood that I might lose my mom. And then at 10 years old, she passed away. Pew Research in 2019 found that the US has the world's highest rate of children living in single parent households. It was an incredibly lonely experience as a child, but also for my father, who put his grief on hold to pay off the debt that was left from the medical bills. This period was one of the hardest periods in both of our lives, and yet we both mostly went through it alone. This was also one of the greatest learning periods in our lives. We just didn't know it yet. There are three lessons that I learned from this period in my life. The first lesson is that we need to shift the focus from moving on to healing. You need to move on. How many times have you heard this offered to you as helpful advice in either grief, a breakup, or any other situation? Now ask yourself, how many times did this phrase actually help? Not giving people the appropriate time that they need to heal is harmful and can cause people to stop seeking support from others or deny themselves the time that they need to heal. For years, I tried to do just that and simply move on. I thought that by smiling, people would stop asking me how I was doing. I thought that that would make me feel better. The interesting thing is, we don't treat physical pain this way. We don't suggest to someone with an obvious physical ailment that they simply move on. A broken arm doesn't heal if you simply try to forget about it. Likewise, a broken heart doesn't heal by pretending it isn't broken. Such as with physical ailments, there is no one size fits all remedy. We need to be open to the needs of those who are hurting. Some need to cry, some people need to talk, some people need to remember all of their favorite memories, and perhaps some just need to process it alone. But it doesn't stop there. We with the broken heart must also be willing to seek help and be open and vulnerable to our needs. We must put in the work for our own healing. Similar to my coping process, my dad focused on his role as a provider by taking on two full-time jobs. For low socioeconomic families who just lost a provider, it may seem that you don't have the extra time or money to, to seek help. But according to the Widowed Parents Project, they find that learning more about grief and how it works can help a parent better cope with their loss. Professional therapy and counseling is costly, but they're not the only options. Simply connecting with those in the family who are going through the same grief is a completely free and cost effective way to seek help. But this can be easier said than done, especially for men in the household. And that brings us to the second lesson. We need to make it okay for men to care about their mental well being. When my father was only 13 years old, his father walked out on his family, leaving behind 7 children and a single mother. As the oldest child, my dad took on the role of providing for his family. He worked while finishing high school to make sure that his family had food on the table and clothes on their backs. Later in life, when confronted with his wife's death, he sought to deal with it the only way he knew how. He worked tirelessly to make sure that we had food on the table and that I had clothes on my back. From childhood, my father learned that the tangible resources that he provided for his family were highly valued. Similarly, many other men grow up learning that they need to provide for their family financially, but not so much emotionally. After their spouse's death, many single fathers find themselves struggling with redefining what it means to be a single father and how they can raise their children alone. A study conducted by the Journal of Gerontology found that widowhood appears to be a more depressing experience for men than for women, with one of the main factors being lack of social support. I found that my dad faces grief by himself. I also began internalizing these notions and the feelings that they had to be dealt with alone. It wasn't until I met my husband, my high school sweetheart, that I was introduced to another option. Robert was really wise for his age. Don't get me wrong, he was still a dumb teen boy who once chugged a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew just for laughs. But he was also highly empathetic. He took on the challenge of really listening to me and understanding me as he urged me to open up. In the years to come, he also took on the role of mediator between my dad and me. He taught us both the value of being vulnerable, transparent, and being open to communication. It wasn't an easy road, and not every argument ended on a happy note. But the relationship that I have now with my dad is something that I never would have imagined years ago. When grieving, communicating your feelings might be the last thing you want to do. You might not want to burden others or bring down their mood, but openly discussing our feelings and our fears are essential to our own healing. Be kind with yourself and take care of your emotional and mental health. Things will never be exactly the same ever again, but that's okay. And that is the third lesson. Now, as a wife, I realize that my dad lost his partner, the love of his life, and his biggest confidant. That's a lonely experience. Dr. Maria Chui at the Institute for Clinical and Evaluative Sciences, or ICES, explains that single fathers are less likely to have relationships and connections within and between social networks that would work to enhance their health, productivity, and well being, such as with the case with my dad. Although I saw him many times express his loneliness, he stopped going to family parties and get togethers unless I urged him to. While bereaved fathers are in need of support from family and friends, they also benefit from finding groups and organizations for single fathers. However, as I found through the research for this talk, finding groups that listed facts, statistics, or were otherwise specifically for single fathers was like pulling teeth, with most information coming from analogical blogs and articles. This is not a unique experience, as the aforementioned ICES notes that single men may face real or perceived barriers to seeking and receiving support. Men need better access to these spaces in order to address all of the changes in their lives and acknowledge their roles as parents and how that has changed. An article in Time magazine in 2018 writes about how fathers may find themselves negatively comparing their actions to how their spouse used to do things. These comparisons have turned toxic as fathers grapple with their fears that the wrong spouses died. However, one father interviewed in the article challenges this form of thinking by pointing out that's not being fair to you. In an ideal world, your child would have both parents, and it's not your fault that they don't have that. So here's my message to all fathers: be kind to yourself. Stop comparing yourself to how your family used to function. Know that from a child's perspective, the best thing you can do is be present, not perfect. During the years that followed, my dad began to be more open to talking about his frustrations, his worries, and the pains that he felt. The changes that he made with himself influenced the relationships that we had. My father learned that it's okay to not know what to do. And I can't thank my father enough for that. I can't thank him enough for being open to change. Together, but on our own accord, we ended up learning to move forward by finally looking back. For the longest time, I wish that things would have ended differently. But through these hardships, I've grown to be someone that would make my mother proud. Our lives have not always been easy, and we know the future won't be easy. But echoing C.S. Lewis, hardships often prepare an ordinary person for an extraordinary destiny. And that is, without a doubt, where we're heading.